Hello, I'm John Nicholson and welcome to my YouTube channel, week 6. And can I just thank all of you who have subscribed, hundreds of extra subscribers this week, and a really good response to my questions and answers from last week. So thank you to those of you who sent in questions, and I'm always delighted to engage by answering the questions that you sent. What else can we talk about this week, apart from that appalling display by Trump in the Oval Office with President Zelensky of Ukraine? It seems to have united people who previously were hostile to Trump with people who just weren't that sure. It was an extraordinary display, obviously pre-planned. Zelensky's sitting there. He's come ostensibly to talk about a trade deal, and instead he finds himself subjected to this appalling pile-on, not only by a ranting Trump, but also by his Vice President Vance joining in. And some of the things they were saying were palpably and obviously not true. First of all, they were saying that Zelensky had never expressed any appreciation to the Americans for the aid that they'd been given. And people responded, of course, almost immediately by putting together clips of Zelensky thanking the Americans dozens, hundreds of times for their help. And then, of course, Trump trying to spread disinformation by saying that Zelensky and Ukraine are responsible for the war, a war in which we know that they were the victims. They were the victims because Russia invaded Ukraine. We all saw it, we all remember it. So the idea by just keeping endlessly repeating Russian talking points that we will start to believe the Kremlin seems insulting to Americans' intelligence and to citizens of Europe and elsewhere. But I was watching Trump and I was thinking, because I went to university in America, I went to Harvard, and I worked in American politics as a speechwriter in Capitol Hill. And I was never a supporter of Reagan or Bush. But I was thinking Ronald Reagan must literally be turning in his grave to see one of his Republican successors and his party, which had always been so hawkish on defense and always so strident about Russia and the Soviet Union, succumbing in this way. I mean, remember, Ronald Reagan described the Soviet Union as the evil empire, and people were horrified when he said that at the time. But I think history has been kind to Ronald Reagan in some regards at least, and we know that it was an empire, evil in many ways too. Soviet Russia occupied its neighbours, subjugated them, stole Finnish land, subjected the Baltic states to mass deportations after the war, was responsible for famines in Ukraine. It was an appalling history. And to find an American president today, apparently in the pockets of the Russians and Putin in particular, is beyond disturbing. And one has to ask why it is that Zelensky seems so to infuriate the president. Is it the fact that he's Jewish, for example? Because we know that Trump has a long history of racism and anti-Semitism. Is that one factor? Who knows? We also know that Zelensky has introduced legislation in Ukraine to control the oligarchs. He's made it illegal for oligarchs in Ukraine to provide money for political parties or for individual politicians. Now that must infuriate Putin and of course, also Trump. But for Zelensky to defend his own land and his own territory, to defend international law, and to find that misinterpreted, misquoted, and opposed by an American president is absolutely horrifying. And the ludicrous questions about the clothes that he was wearing, for example. I mean, there's a man who's sitting there wearing olive green quasi-military fatigues. His country is at war and he's been attacked for not wearing a badly cut business suit like Donald Trump with a long red tie. I mean, please give me a break. But the question is how we respond to it. And the Europeans, I think, now realise just how important it is for us collectively to look after our own security. The incoming German Chancellor has said, Europe, and I quote him, Europe must be independent now when it comes to the military. The President of the EU Commission said today, and I'm recording this on Tuesday, that we must massively boost our defence spending here in Europe. I find it interesting, though, that what Donald Trump is saying isn't even popular with his fellow American citizens. There's huge support for Ukraine in America. The latest poll shows that 65% of Americans believe that aid to Ukraine should be sustained or even increased. So, as we look to Europe's future, I think we should look to what some of the leading countries, for example, in the Baltic states, are telling us. The Baltic states and the Nordic states, the group of 8, and they are handing over huge amounts of aid. Estonia, tiny Estonia, is giving the largest percentage of its GDP of any country in Europe, and they're giving it to Ukraine. Denmark is second. But Estonia is an interesting example because Estonia was occupied by Soviet Russia, by the Soviet Union, and only got its independence at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what terrifies the Estonians is if Ukraine falls, are they next? And they have a large Russian-speaking population, and traditionally the Russians, and especially Putin, have used Russian-speaking minorities as an excuse for military and other interventions. That was the excuse in Ukraine, that in the east of the country, people spoke Russian and their rights were being eroded. But what we know, in fact, is that's not true. There's been a huge increase in the number of Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian as a result of the war, because they're outraged at the way in which their country's independence has been eroded and attacked. And it's very important to remember that every single province of Ukraine, including the eastern Russian-speaking parts, voted for independence and a new constitution when they were given the opportunity in an internationally recognized plebiscite. As of today, we know that the American president has said that he's going to suspend aid to Ukraine. That really is a game changer to do that, because we know just how heavily Ukraine relies on American aid. So what we have to do is support Ukraine here in Europe. And that's changing the way many people are looking at NATO as a defensive alliance. I was looking at the figures. 90% support NATO in Finland now. Now, Finland, of course, until recently was a neutral country that wasn't part of NATO. But so scared are they of what the Russians have done in Ukraine that not only have they abandoned neutrality, but their opinion polls have transformed with this huge support for NATO. We see that as well in Sweden. Again, traditionally neutral in the Second World War. They've also joined, and that's a dramatic shift in Sweden's culture. Some people have looked at Donald Trump and tried to draw historical comparisons. Now, I was interested in what Obama's ambassador to Moscow said about the way that Zelensky had been treated. He said it was like the United States switching sides in 1940 and deciding to abandon Churchill and the United Kingdom. And that seems a disturbing but increasingly apt comparison. I have to say, I was far from impressed with what Keir Starmer did when he visited recently, and I think recent history, has shown how ill-judged it was. You saw him sitting in the Oval Office. I know what he was trying to do. He was trying to be obsequious to Trump. He was trying to win Trump over, to appease Trump, backslapping, handing over a letter from the king, inviting him for an official visit, a second state visit. I don't think that's the way to deal with Trump. It doesn't work long term. There's a limit to how much you can indulge him repeatedly. And ultimately, when it comes to Ukraine, there isn't a compromise position. You're either with the Europeans and Ukraine and supporting international law and supporting Ukraine's right to independence, or like Trump, you believe Ukraine is responsible for the war and should surrender territory to Russia, rewarding Russia for its aggression. There should never have been a second state visit invitation given to Donald Trump. He hasn't earned it. And we know that when he arrives in this country, if it goes ahead, it'll be boycotted by politicians. I think from all the parties, the SNP will boycott it. I imagine many Labour people will, and Tories too. It's only going to be Nigel Farage and Reform who are going to be enthusiastic about it. There's talk about him going to Balmoral in Scotland. Well, we know that 71% of Scots, 71% in the latest poll, have a strongly unfavourable view of Donald Trump. State visits should be given as a reward for delivering in some way. And Keir Starmer has given this away far too early and far too easily. He's put the king in an impossible position. There will be widespread protests. And I hope it'll be difficult to withdraw the invitation. But I very much hope that the process of advancing the invitation is put on the back burner for a significant period of time. I hope Donald Trump doesn't make a return visit. So there we have it. Another eventful week in Washington. Every time I turn on my computer and look at my laptop, there's more outrages from Donald Trump. But one thing is clear. After the performance with Zelensky in the Oval Office, there is no doubt now that Donald Trump is a Putin puppet. The Republican Party has surrendered to Donald Trump. It is no longer the party of international order, of law and order. It's no longer the party that will stand up to a president who strays. It's no longer a party that will resist the Russians, the Russian dictator. It has fallen into the arms of Trump, who's fallen into the arms of Putin. We clearly in Europe must now look after our own defence in a way we haven't done before. We have to increase defence spending, not of course by cutting international aid in the way that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have done, but we must increase our defence spending. We must be aware that Europe is now in peril, especially the countries that border Russia. I find myself in the unlikely position of feeling and sounding hawkish about this as somebody always opposed Trident and still do oppose Trident. Clearly, this is a time for international solidarity within Europe. We must strengthen NATO. Of course, we should be back in the European Union, and we must be aware that America is no longer, at least under this president, is no longer our friend. So thank you for watching. Please do tell me what you think. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It costs absolutely nothing. Just press the subscribe button. And please do give your comments. Tell me what you think. I think it's important to engage in respectful debate. As you know, I love listening to your comments. I always answer your comments. And please do join the increasingly large group of people who are following this channel. It's much appreciated. Thank you for watching.